All right, we're recording.
Perfect. Do you know
So,
about, have you, I had to like download it or upload it as a YouTube video, and then I got the little thing. I don't know if you've had to do this before. So.
yeah, I haven't had to do it before. So,
Yeah, it was my first time too. So you just literally like upload it like it's your own YouTube video, and then it's out there for everyone, but who's gonna watch it? So
yeah. Okay, cool.
yeah.
Um, all right. So, I guess we can just start the discussion. Um, so just to like give everybody a recap on the case. Um, this week's case was
Frank Davis
called,
is the mean guy,
yep,
pretty
it
much.
was like Frank Davis and Thomas Green. So Thomas Green is the guy. He was recently promoted and rapidly promoted to a new position. And then I forget the other guy's name. I think his name's Frank. He is like anyways, they don't get along basically, and he sets these sales goals that Thomas thinks are like super unrealistic, and so Thomas is kind of criticizing him and questioning his tactics for setting those sales goals. And eventually, he thinks that his boss is going to fire him because of it. Um, so I guess the first question, it says, "What do you see as the key issues in this case?"
Well, I guess one of the big issues is that he kind of mentions it near the ending, Thomas Green, about how once he got his promotion, he wasn't really focusing on office politics and office relationships. So with all these things where he thinks that because of personal issues, Frank's out to get him, he hasn't really built a reputation with those around him to side with him, even though he thinks it's a pretty biased situation. So building good relationships in the workplace pretty much is a big issue right now.
Right.
I think a big issue I saw, I don't know, there were a lot of issues I saw with him because he was so like independent. I mean, it's cool that he took a lot of incentive and really went for it, and he's all, I get what's happening. I have a huge, like, solid opinion on these things, but he just didn't care about working as a team. He just wanted to be an individual, like, superstar.
Yeah.
So he forgot that, hey, sometimes your boss, their opinion really matters, so I don't know.
I like that.
I would agree with that, Dora. I think that Frank does come off as kind of a tough guy. I'm the one who runs the show type of scenario, but at the same time, I think that he sees Tom as maybe not a team player, and he's focusing so much on his individual achievements that he's just not willing to
And this is
play along with the team.
This is talking from Frank's perspective or Tom's?
From Frank's.
Oh, okay. I was voicing Tom's perspective.
Oh,
yeah. Sorry.
Gotcha.
Should have specified.
Hi, Soraya. How are you?
Hi.
Thanks for joining us. We're just talking about the key issues in the case right now. So, things that we thought were problems in the case. So,
and Dora, you'd mentioned you were just talking about how, I can't remember whether it was you or Parker had mentioned how Thomas, he's kind of just trying to be a superstar himself right now, and that is pretty notable through even if those like micromanaging what Frank is doing with what he's doing wrong with, like, not giving me update with your schedule, those kind of things. It can be obnoxious micromanaging, but still there are legitimate stuff where you can see through his decisions that he's kind of just focusing on him just doing great and he's not really being a team player.
Is this
so this is
Tom
me.
or Frank?
This is in favor of Frank from that perspective, even
Same.
though.
Yeah. Like, who's all, like, on Frank's side? Parker, are you on Frank's side?
Um,
So I am mostly Thomas's side.
No way.
Frank,
really?
Yeah. Yeah, because I think Frank is really biased.
yeah, I think
Fair.
I'm probably pro Thomas, if I'm being completely honest. I do think Thomas has like issues something that he can compromise on, but I do think Frank a little bit and maybe feels like he got motivated or he got promoted too quickly, things like that.
Mhm.
That's what I think. I tend to lean a little bit more towards Thomas as well, even though he's making some pretty blatant mistakes. But I think that Frank just sees Thomas as, maybe getting the promotion a little too early and just showing off a little too much. And maybe he feels a little threatened by it.
Yeah. And I think, especially given the details of why Frank could be biased in the situation and how at the end Thomas mentions he thinks Frank's just building up his argument, I think Frank is saying things that can technically be true of why Thomas is struggling in his department, but I think he's just saying what should be said as opposed to what he actually means. And I think that he really is just upset that Thomas got that position.
That's interesting. I kind of focus more towards Frank's side because, I don't know, it just seemed like, I mean, the workplace, when you have your manager and stuff, it's kind of like a marriage relationship kind of thing where you rely on each other to do a job, and if you're not communicating, it's not going to be a successful thing. And a lot of risks happen because of this. And so he's making what he's in charge of vulnerable because he's not communicating and he's not getting the support that he could be getting. And so, I don't know, that's the fault of not trying to work as a team, because maybe there are good ideas that Frank has and they're not taking it into consideration.
Yeah, I think that my main issue of why it's still hard for me to totally side with Frank, while I can see the points he's making, why they are good points, is I think that the biggest issue isn't the things that he had mentioned in the meeting. I think the biggest issue is, from Thomas's perspective, setting unrealistic goals and giving unrealistic ideas to corporate from what they can actually achieve. Because, I mean, I've been in that position where you got someone who's really, really gung-ho and you're like, okay, it's good to be optimistic, but if you're unrealistic, it's just unrealistic. It's not going to do anyone any good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's totally fair.
Okay, so Cassidy, what do you think? I'm curious, who do you side with more, Frank or Thomas?
I don't know, because I feel like they both have pretty valid points. I think they both just sort of tone it down a little bit and figure out where they can meet in the middle, but it doesn't sound like either of them really want to meet in the middle. So I think that Frank has good points with, like, he needs to do, like, what I ask him to when I ask him to do it, and he needs to keep me updated on everything. But I also feel like, coming from my own perspective in my own job, when somebody comes up to me like, I need this right now, I need this report right this second, and it's like I've got 6 other things to do that are kind of more of a priority, it's kind of like, what do you do? So I don't know. I kind of see both sides, I guess. So it's hard. But it also seems like Frank, just because Thomas isn't necessarily the person who Frank wants to have the job, I don't think that's completely fair, because I don't think he's coming in with an open mind and actually trying to work with him and, like, help him succeed, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. I think you bring up a good point. I think like, I just finished reading the other article we had to read, and there was something about trying to remember how it was worded. Both parties in the example it gave were like at the top of their ladder, and they were both like yelling down at the other person, telling them they needed to change, but really they needed to, meet in the middle. I think that's kind of similar to what's going on here. I like it.
Hi.
Hey, Suzanne.
Hello.
How are you doing?
Pretty good. Long day.
I'm doing a group meeting. My little brother just walked down the stairs and he's like, "What are you doing? Like, are you talking?"
Talking to myself. Suzanne, we're asking like if you're more on Thomas's side or Frank's side from the case, and I really want to know your opinion because I'm apparently a minority right now.
So I feel like the way the case is drafted kind of puts you on Green's side at first because you're like, oh, he's worked hard, he's earned the position he's in and stuff. And then once you kind of like look at some of the other side, it's like, okay, well, I don't know. I feel like there's a lot of envy on, what's his name again?
Frank?
Yeah, Davis, there we go. I feel like there's a lot of envy on his side, which they kind of mention when Green first gets promoted. The VP's kind of like, now, just so you know, you're kind of making up through the fast track or whatever. So, you probably wouldn't have been picked, which is kind of a funny comment. But I don't know. I just feel like there's them meeting together is a good thing, but it didn't really seem like their meetings or what they were talking about was very productive. So I think there's good intent on both sides, but I don't know. I kind of feel bad for Green because it does seem like he has worked really hard to get to where he's been, and Davis is kind of picking on him like right from the start. So, I mean, big shoes to fill, but I don't know.
Okay, so I think I like that answer a lot. I really like this question that it poses here. It says, if you were Shannon McDonald, who's the vice president of the company, would you have hired Thomas Green? Why or why not? So.
Like, would have hired in retrospect, or would have hired
would you have hired him? I think for the for the position,
just initially from the beginning, without knowing any of what would happen later.
I don't know. I guess we can kind of take it whichever way we want. It just says, would you have hired Thomas Green? So,
I think based on the information that we have, I still think I would have hired him. One of the important things to consider is that anybody you hire is never going to be perfect for any position. There's always going to be, some coaching needed. And maybe, Frank should have sat down with him and, set more realistic expectations. I think some of the communication issues may have been resolved if there was a clear set of, expectations from the beginning. Maybe that was done, maybe it wasn't done, and maybe that's where, Thomas is, falling short. But I think, he's a good performer. He just, needs a little bit more coaching and guidance.
Mm-hmm.
Really
yeah. And I think, honestly, for coaching and guidance, the stuff that Frank had told him in their meetings that kind of I feel is less relevant to the main issue that Thomas is experiencing. I feel like at this point, all Thomas can really do is he can stand his ground with the issues he's having, but I think he's just got to suck it up and one by one check off those things that Frank's having issues with, because Frank's going to run out of things if he fixes those.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Update his Outlook calendar.
Right? For Pete's sake, it's such a small thing.
Just do it. You can continue to criticize him can criticize Frank about his issues, but then update your calendar.
Right. Well, I saw his. Oh wait, I could go off on a rant, but I don't know if I'm sticking with the question. What
Rant
question?
if you want.
Okay. Well,
Go for it.
well, the thing is, like, you know, he had some valid points. He's all like, listen, I needed this data so that I could do my own job. And he wasn't getting back to him, wasn't giving him what he needed. And that's his job. And then he was asking Thomas to back up his proposals to the potential clients with data. And in the end, that's what those clients were asking for when it came down to closing it. They were asking the salespeople, okay, we actually want to see some solid numbers before we say okay. And so when your boss is asking for it and even the clients are asking for it, that's when you should stop and think, maybe I should do that, because he's so self-confident in, you know, it's all in my head. Right. So that was a valid argument for him. And on top of that, you know, it's been so long, and he I want to say Frank had asked him, you know, have you even made any real progress? And he had to say no. And Frank was like, well, when that's the case, we need to renegotiate exactly how we're approaching things. So that's where I saw where Frank was coming from, and he was legitimately trying to help him do his job well instead of just give him a hard time.
Right.
Something I just kind of noticed, I was thinking about while I was reading the case originally, kind of going on, in addition to that, wasn't the second email when he was talking about how like the presentations and stuff were political, which I just kind of thought was funny. I think Green might have to kind of evaluate his place in the business, because, you know, he's worked his way up pretty quickly, but I don't know. I don't know if I want to say all companies are political, but there is that chain of command, and there are general expectations that people need to provide. So I think he needs to kind of be like, okay, you know, I was told from the get-go that I'm going to be in a position that requires has tactical command. I need to forecast things and know how to manage information, but he doesn't seem to like sharing information, especially on paper, which I know, especially for managers, like at least with the company I work at, like they don't like long emails. They don't like a lot of information, but it's like visuals and numbers are important because that's where the data comes from, and to really track like, okay, how is the company doing? How is this part of the business doing? How are we doing in this area? Is it profitable? You know, like I think Green maybe has had too much fun just trying to like work up, which is good. Like his ambition, I think, is honorable, but I think he needs a little more structure and organization. So he needs to kind of get in his head like, okay, now that I'm kind of becoming a bigwig in the company, I need to actually be able to show something for myself, not just do fancy things and blah, 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 you know?
Right. I think it's important, like at some point, like you were saying, Suzanne, to like be able to back your numbers up, because there's only so much that
charisma.
Yeah, there's only so much that you can feed people, and then at some point you have to be able to back it up with like facts and be able to show that to them, and that helps them feel more comfortable with the situation. And ultimately, as like a marketing manager or senior manager, he's representing the company or that department, and so he kind of has to have, you know, more resources to back up what he's saying, I think anyways.
Especially when you're working with these different groups that have to report what you say to their higher-ups, and their higher-ups, they're not going to see your secondhand charisma or anything.
No, right? Yeah.
Exactly. And a lot of times a lot of the messaging or a lot of that charisma is lost in translation. So he could be doing a great job presenting, but then if, you know, the person that he initially presented to has to now present to their boss and they don't have any hard facts to show them, it's going to make the job that much more difficult for the decision maker. And chances are they probably won't go with him because they don't have the numbers to back it up.
It's kind of like I don't know why I just thought about this. It's kind of like that telephone game you play when you're like in elementary school. The first person starts and they like whisper into somebody's ear and say something, and then the next person whispers it, and by the end, like the message is completely different. And so I kind of envisioned that, like super awesome presentation, but then by the time it gets to who it's actually supposed to go to, it's not very effective.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I don't know. Soraya, what do you think? Do you have any thoughts?
Sorry, I have with my internet.
Oh no, you're good.
Yeah,
You're good.
but what is the question?
Just what are some of your thoughts on the case? What did you like? What did you think about Thomas Green and Frank?
Okay. So I think that the issues is like Thomas think that everything he does is right and reject any feedback that doesn't highlight his job performance. So um, so in my case, I don't think that McDonald have hired Thomas
Mhm.
because he's not prepared for this position. I think that it's necessary to give this person a training about the position to be a good leader.
I like that.
Good leader need to be willing to learn about how now getting the data and support all his ideas.
That's a great answer. Good job. Cassie, what did you think?
What was the question? I think I
Sorry, I was kind of all over the place. Do you think if you were McDonald, if you were the vice president, do you think you should have hired McDonald? Would you have hired McDonald? Is the question.
would I have hired McDonald?
Or would you
If
have
you were
hired?
McDonald's, would you hire Green?
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, okay. No, you're good. I think that no, because it's hard because when you see so much, when somebody shows so much potential and so much drive, I think you want to give them the chance. But I also think, so I think I would have given him a chance, but I think I maybe would have maybe sent like some trainings or something to kind of get the management side down a little bit, because that seems to be where he's lacking from what I understood from what I read. So I don't know. I think he deserves a chance, I guess.
Yeah. And I think a big point that it makes in there is, I mean, McDonald does mention, she's taking a chance on him pretty much. And so, I mean, if you're going to take a chance on something like that, I mean, you kind of gotta expect there to be some issues with the between the lines kind of learning process for a job like that. Not all the numbers and everything, but like the politics and understanding how manager positions work with others in the area, and how she's taking a chance on him. So there's gonna be it's gonna be a learning curve with that.
Right.
One other thing to consider is if we look in Exhibit 2 under Frank Davis, he's also been with the company for 17 years, and he's done, Tom's job. So, he knows what it takes to be successful, and I think that he just sees Tom as, just barely starting out, thinks he knows everything, when in reality, things are not as easy as he may think. So I think, we can see both sides of the argument there, but at the end of the day, Thomas, does have good potential. Maybe McDonald did jump the gun in promoting him so quickly, but I think with the proper guidance and training, as long as he's willing to change, I think that he and Frank can make a good team.
I like some of those thoughts you had, and something I was kind of trying to think from the start of this too was a lot of time with job roles. I mean, I think in corporations they would, like big corporations, I mean, they probably tend to stay kind of the same way because they usually have their structure and their systems in place. But I feel like Thomas Green has been pretty good about he's been ambitious enough to learn about things, and I think he does have that drive to evolve and kind of fill the shoes that he's suddenly being asked to fill. So I think there's definitely that potential. I think he definitely needs to make his own adjustments as far as his own being organized. And McDonald had asked him to, like, there's a lot you're going to be learning and figuring out. So I advise you to really talk to these other managers who've been in this role, or talk to those around you so you can get sufficient information to basically do your job. So maybe Green can do a bit more communication with them. I don't know how much he really had been before, but maybe.
He mentions he'd slacked in that area.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay, yeah. So maybe rather than just trying to avoid Davis, kind of turn it around and ask him specifically, okay, I've been noticing da-da-da, or even just ask him about the forecast, like, I was thinking this, and this is why. Actually provide information, because that's what Davis wanted, and maybe they could kind of either meet halfway, or whichever one could make corrections on their numbers, and just kind of develop that culture of consulting rather than conflicting.
I'd agree with that. I thought it was kind of low how Tom was sneaking around and just like talking to other upper managers. Honestly, if I was in Frank's position and I heard that the person that I was supposed to be supervising was doing that, I'd be pretty upset. Like, it's like working with somebody in high school. That's just ridiculous. It just sounds like you're working with a teenager. Mm-hmm. So being more assertive and just going to the source, being an adult, talking things out. Everybody has disagreements and opinions, and that's okay. Mm-hmm. But he was going about it in a childish way, in my opinion. So.
And I mean, I totally get that. It's just the only concern I have is that from Thomas's perspective, the way he's seeing it is he feels that all these complaints that Frank is having about his work is based off of Thomas's criticism of his efforts. So I guess that's why he felt like he had to avoid Frank. At first, he didn't think he had to avoid Frank. At first, he thought things were good, but then he saw these things out of nowhere, and he felt like there were issues Frank was looking for based on something else. So I guess that's just where Thomas is coming from as far as why I think he avoided that method.
Mm-hmm. I'd agree, but I mean, Frank, he gave, or was it Frank or Tom? Davis? He gave really specific things that he wanted him to improve on. It's not as if he was like, oh, you're doing this and this, and it was completely unjustified. He clearly outlined in his email what's wrong and what he expects it to improve. And did he do any of those? No. And so his integrity was completely lacking. So I don't know. I wouldn't want to work with him after that. That would be completely ridiculous.
Yeah, and that's why I think even if I think Frank might have just been searching for problems, I think the best thing to do there is for Thomas to just address those and fix those problems, because he was very specific about them.
Mm-hmm. And they were small. It wasn't big deals.
Yeah.
And I think that's really the key. If he addresses Frank's issues and they're corrected, then Frank is not going to have a leg to stand on. So what's he going to say after that?
Right.
But again, they're just minor adjustments, but it's those minor details that, make a big difference. So, in Frank's eyes, maybe he sees Tom as, this guy that just wants to, kind of run amok and do whatever he wants, no structure, no discipline. And having somebody like that in an organization can be counterproductive and can erode away the culture that has been built up over years. So I can see, Frank's hesitation too, but I think deep down he's finding things to nitpick because he's a up and coming star, and maybe he just doesn't want to be, shown up.
Mm-hmm. I like that. So I kind of want to shift gears a little bit. The next section, it asks about their conflict styles. So it says, what are Green's, and I forget the other guy's name, Frank Davis. What are their conflict styles? So how do they deal with conflict? I think it's just from a personal perspective. I think it's interesting. I don't know that Davis, he kind of, he does confront Green about his issues at first, but then he goes running to his vice president really fast. I feel like I don't know, but from a personal perspective, I think that's kind of, I don't know if that's weird, but I don't know. What do you guys think?
I've never worked in a corporate setting.
Me neither.
Well, the first thing I find interesting is in the first email, he CCs Thomas Green. So it's not like he's trying to go behind his back. He's
Right.
just calling it how it is.
Yeah.
But then in the latter emails, it seems like he does
Skip over him.
he does, go directly to the VP. So that, could be questionable, right? But maybe he starts doing that after he finds out that Thomas is going around his back, spreading rumors. And
Right.
at the end of the day, you can't go, complaining to other managers about your boss, because even though you may be in the right and you may be saying the right things, that's going to reflect poorly on you, regardless of how right you are.
Yeah.
That's just my view.
I can see why Frank went to McDonald, because she was the one who recommended him. So I don't know. I'd kind of do that myself, and I'm like, hey, I'm having all these issues with this person, and we talked about it before. I voiced my uncertainties from the beginning. It was wrong of him not to clue Green in on the fact that he wasn't happy with him for other reasons, but he'll find out one way or another. I don't know.
I think there needs to be a lot of compromising type discussion between the two, because there's a lot of potential and wisdom between the two, but I feel like Green is very avoidant. He's pretty good at being aggressive with his own goals, but when having to handle people in a very systematic way, he gets a little disenchanted. I don't know if it's just this is boring, or he likes doing his own thing and likes being independent, which is understandable. But Davis, I think, is he's very forward, but also I don't know, if you want to confront somebody about an issue, technically the most ideal way is to make it a psychologically safe environment, like we talked about in the last couple days. And you have to make it comfortable enough for everyone to say okay, well, actually it turned out that blah blah blah. Example, at our own workplace, we had somebody who we thought was lying on their timesheet, so I was kind of gearing up to throw all these hard balls essentially at this employee or whatever, because it's that's bad, that's worth getting fired over. But turned out that wasn't actually the case. There was other things that happened or transpired, or so I was okay, everything's okay. But we ended up turning the conversation into okay, something we're still having a hard time though is this and this. So if you can do this, it would probably be easier for you, and it'll be easier for us. And it totally changed the tide of the conversation, rather than making it this agenda of well, you're a horrible person, you're terrible at your job, I don't like you, and you're not qualified. It's okay.
Ugly.
He gets kind of pulverized, but then at the same time, Green's kind of, I don't know. I don't think Davis made a very good, I don't think he approached him in a very open-ended way. It was kind of just this is my agenda and I don't like you. But I do think Green could have been a little more sort of saying, okay, I can work on this and this because it's important to you and it will help me do better at my job. But if you can help me with this, or just share your points of view on these numbers, because I didn't agree with them. I don't know, just being a little more willing to compromise and see eye to eye, because it's well, you guys do work together, so probably should at least be friends on the work floor, So
Yeah. I totally agree with you there. I think that throwing aside if they do have any ulterior motives or whatever it is there, Green, he is definitely very passive, and he like checks in to see if the problem's still there and then lingers back and hopes that it goes away. And whereas Davis, he talks to these different people, he contacts McDonald, he has face-to-face meetings with Green, says, these are issues, let's fix these issues. Much more direct in his conflict resolution.
I think that everyone just needs to meet in the middle rather, so one can kind of tone it down, the other needs to turn up their energy to just be a little more proactive and willing to work, because Davis does know what the game is like there in Green. He did kind of get tossed in head first, but he probably could have done a better job of asking questions and trying to work with Davis a little more closely and asking the right kinds of questions.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so Cassidy and Soraya, if you were, I always forget the guy's name. If you were Green, what would you do now? Like, all that's happened, but how would you approach the situation? How would you rectify it?
I think if I were him and I knew that somebody was like gunning for me to basically get fired, I would try to make it right with them. Like, I would try to have a conversation and like address the concerns for real, and just try to work on them. And then if it doesn't work and I don't like it, how he wants to do it or whatever, I think I would probably try to figure something else out, like a different job, go back to my other position or something. That's what I would do.
Okay. I like that. Soraya, what would you do? If she's still there. She might not have her mic on. Oh, she does. Okay.
Her internet was having some issues.
Yeah, that's all right. Okay, so Jacob, since you're on my screen, what would you do if you were?
If I were Green, if I were Thomas, well, I care much more about a comfortable work environment than a high salary. So I would get a second mortgage, move to Boston. No, I don't know. No, I would do what I said at the beginning there. I would suck it up and fix the things that he had listed off. And I mean, I could still stand my ground as far as if I thought that his goals were unrealistic, and I could do my best with what I thought was realistic and, prepare better for the goals for the next year. But yeah, I mean, fix the things that Frank suggested, so he can't complain about those and he can't have anything else to stand on, and then do my best with more realistic goals.
Right. Anybody else got any thoughts?
I do. I don't know, just thinking about it. I'd say, like, the core issue is that neither of these guys feels like the other values his opinion. Because from the get-go, Frank was like, I think you're stupid, like, in summary. And then Green was like, I think you're stupid. And then they were very mad with each other after that.
You.
Right? And so, like, one of them has to, I think Frank has honestly made more of an effort in some ways to try to make things work. But it's honestly, the ball is in Green's court to really, like, show him his opinion matters, show him, oh, you need me to, like, let you know where I'm at, like, it's so much like a marriage, you're like, just tell me where you are, so that I'm not waiting for you, or Like, if I need something done, if I need the laundry done, just please do it, because I'm sick of coming home and needing to do that on top of everything else today. That's a legitimate fight. So I don't know. It just makes sense. Like, he's just doing small things like that shows his boss that he values his opinion.
Mhm.
And that's the most important part. And then when there's mutual respect like that, then you can get through things that you disagree about. Like, I don't think your outlook for what we can get this year is likely, you know? And then maybe Frank will have things to learn from Green, and then that'll be good.
Something I was kind of wondering about, kind of going back to McDonald's shoes, I almost wonder, like, if it would be worth considering moving Green to, like, a different division, or, like, not demoting him per se or promoting him again, but
Transferring him.
transferring. Like, I wonder if that would be beneficial, because it sounds like he has good relationships with other people in the company. I mean, hopefully not gossip based, but I wonder if it would be worth considering, like, having him thrive in a different role, or maybe just whether a different division or just like a different kind of role, like doing the same sort of thing, but I don't know, just any of those adjustments, because sometimes that does work. Not all the time, but I have seen it be effective and see people's performance totally change when they found something that was a little bit more of their niche.
Yeah, I think if I was in McDonald's shoes, I would just have a heart-to-heart with Green and say, look, we're not asking you to be a yes man. You don't have to agree with everything that Frank says, but you do need to comply with some of the basic expectations, like communicating where you will be, what you will be doing. If a brief is asked of you, to get it in by a certain time, you need to comply with that, because, the company doesn't revolve around you, and your manager needs, things from you to be able to get his job done. And I think that if, he does that, complies with those things that Frank has asked him to do, and then, he, as Parker was saying, or Jacob was saying, he can disagree with him on the forecast and say, look, I agree with this, and this, but I completely disagree with your forecast. And I think that's okay. And I think that Frank would, would respect him a little more. I think that respect would start growing and that trust would start growing over time. But if they both keep going the way they're going, Green's just going to get fired.
Right. I feel like the ball's kind of in Green's court, essentially, because at the end of the day, Frank is his boss, and so whether he's trying to pick on him or not, he's got
the power.
Yeah, he's still got to listen to him, because if not, he's just going to get fired. And I feel like it's just pretty similar to this week's reading assignment, honestly. Like, I mean, I don't know. Just like, I don't know. I forgot what I was going to say. But yeah.
So it has to be a win-win for everybody. I think that's where you're getting at, right?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Okay. All right. So I do have another. So you could argue that in this case, there was like office politics might have played an effect in Frank's behavior towards. So how does office politics? How does that play a role in like real life? Does that actually play a role, or like do we have experiences with that?
I think there is a political, I don't know, pyramid, I think, that kind of develops in people's minds, whether you're considering yourself on the lower rungs or you think you're at the top. I mean, I don't know, think about like a company I used to work for. There's just kind of a weird, I don't know, it was just a strange company to work for, but it's like there's people who had this, I don't know, I think people have weird perceptions almost of what they are. And I think for Green, he's like put in this big position, so it's like exciting and lots on his mind, but he didn't really think like, okay, I probably should honor my role a little bit more, or like just have a little more respect towards it, because it's not just I think once you get to that point, you can't really think, oh, this is my job. Like I work 9 to 5, because generally as like a manager, you don't work 9 to 5, and you have to put a little more guts into your work because, you know, you have worked and earned your way. So not to use the cliche, but like with the more power comes more responsibility. Generally, the higher your paychecks, the more responsibility you're getting tossed on your plate. So you have to kind of respect it, because there's almost not like more liability attached to it, but just more you got to think about, and you have to kind of be willing to fill those shoes once you get that dollar rate bumping up, hopefully. It's not just like a title. I think it's not just the not the badge, but like the little plate you get on your desk or your door if you're lucky enough to get your own office. You have to kind of earn it.
Right. Okay, well, I actually did notice this at the very bottom of the agenda. It actually gives what actually happened.
Oh, cool.
in
Wait,
case.
really?
Yeah, so I want to kind of read that. It says maybe to read it. So I'm just going to read that really quick.
Okay.
It says, after McDonald's February 5th, 2008 email, Green took the offensive against his boss. He crafted a series of memorandums, emails, reports, and projections that exposed inaccuracies in creative forecasting. This data enabled Green to build some alliances with other marketing personnel who used the data to ultimately side with him. On April 4th, it was announced that Frank Davis was being moved laterally to an undefined special project. However, Green's tactics were seen as utterly brutal by many in the company, and although he won the battle against his boss, his career was irreparably harmed. McDonald's distanced herself in the company. Okay. McDonald's distanced herself from him. By July of 2008, Green announced he was resigning from his position to pursue full-time studies for an MBA.
Dang.
So what was the boss doing wrong?
So it sounds like Green just like took offensive against his boss. So like I think
Where'd you read this again? Where is this showing up?
it's just like at the
The
very
bottom of the agenda.
bottom of the agenda. It's worded kind of weird, but it looks like
It's
like a
basically
bullet point
alluding to the
article.
fact that that Davis was just getting very creative with his forecasting. So basically lying.
Oh. Okay.
Gotcha.
and rather than like it makes it sound like rather than compromise with Davis, Green rather than do that, he just exposed him. So
Wait, so Green saw that he was vulnerable and he totally
Bam, bam,
Like-
bam. Take him down.
rude.
But I think it's
Empowering.
interesting because I don't know. I feel like trying to give Frank the benefit of the doubt. I feel like he did do Green's job in the past, and so he maybe was trying to help him out of the goodness of his heart, and they could have both benefited from each other. But rather than heeding his advice, he just exposed him and.
Talk about going from a potentially win-win situation to a lose-lose situation. I mean, there couldn't have been a worse outcome.
Exactly. I mean, because both, you got to think that Green and Frank were both valuable assets, and together they could have been really effective, but instead they just butted heads the whole time. So.
That's too bad.
But
Man, I was really trying to empathize with Davis, but he just good grief.
all right. Well, honestly, that's all I really have. Sorry, it was kind of all over the place.
That was pretty good.
That was
The
good.
agenda, I feel like, was kind of all over the place, but that's okay. So
Well, I have a question for you guys.
yeah.
After hearing the ending to that story, how many of you are wanting to switch sides now?
Mm.
Personally, like I've been like this crazy opinionated person, like Team Frank, but he, I don't know. Still, at the same time, you know, you feel intimidated. You have this awesome hot shot coming into the area. You want him to be motivated to really shoot for the stars, and so you set the bar high. But he kind of took an opposite direction and had a very negative outlook at it, and it all just turned into a big mess in the end. So I don't know. I can still see where Frank, you know, he was just doing his best. He's been with that company for almost 20 years. Like, give him a break.
I
Yeah.
personally am going to be switching my position to Frank because I mean it's just showing you know, Green's true colors, you know, it just seems kind of immature.
Mm-hmm.
You know, just punching below the belt like that. Again, I think that, you know, I've been a part of several organizations where the managers are always, you know, giving unrealistic expectations to shoot for. Yeah, I think that's kind of a manager's role, you know, within reason, obviously. But yeah, I mean, what Green did, I just think speaks a lot to his character.
Right.
So when it was revealed that Frank, you know, had issues, what do you think Green should have done?
Well, I don't know if it was. I don't know. I think it kind of that he did expose him. I mean, I think it kind of things got bad for him. So the fact that he could expose him. So I think I don't know. I'm kind of on Ernesto's side here, where I think he just should have handled the situation differently.
And I think he could have. Sorry, you go ahead, Ernesto.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say that I think that, yeah, he definitely could have handled it differently. I think more details would be needed to see how exactly he did handle it. Like, how was he made aware of the situation? How did he make everyone else aware of the situation?
What was the situation?
Well, about Frank being creative or whatever with his numbers. And
Yeah, like I just want to know, like, what the situation was. You know, the numbers.
Yeah. So what happened there? I just want to know the specifics there, and then could get a better idea for what Green could have done better. Instead of being all out vengeful, there's probably a better way to go about it while still not letting something like that continue to happen.
Right.
I kind of almost think everybody in this story is sort of weird, like has issues. Like with Green, it's like, okay, jerk, move. You know, he probably could have just tried reasoning things out with Davis, and even if David, like let's say Davis was totally incompetent, like, no, I'm right, you're wrong, then like, okay, he could have taken it to McDonald, but then like Davis, you know, is fabricating numbers and like that seemed to get proved. So it's like, okay, so he's been there 20 years. Like, has he been like fraudulent before? And then the other thing too, I think McDonald's is kind of weirdly invested in Green, just like, I don't know, like mentioning here, like the distant, I don't know, I guess it makes sense, but I feel like McDonald was almost weirdly invested. It's like, well,
Wow, you read a lot into it.
You want to
like, and I
got the hots for Green.
I think it says.
I'm not even specifically stating that was the case, but just kind of like, okay, if this was so important, like, why didn't you like, okay, your managers are having problems, but you're the big manager. Managers are a part of conflict resolution. So why didn't you talk to both of them at the same time? I don't know. Everyone at this company just seems to have issues. So kind of like,
Well, I think McDonald went about it the right way. I mean, she kind of, you know, picked her winning horse and then realized, hey, maybe this guy isn't such a winner after all. And that's where she had to kind of distance herself, you know, to kind of save her own career. I just think that the way that Green went about it was very vindictive, not in an effort to be a team player and to resolve. I mean, he could have approached Frank and say, look, I think these numbers are too creative. Where are you getting your numbers? Because based on what I'm seeing here, and it's not like he can change the numbers. So it would have given Frank at least the opportunity to say, okay, look, yes, these are the numbers, but I always like to shoot a little bit higher. You know, there's kind of an explanation there. You know, the guy's been with the company 17 years. I don't think that he's been, you know, lying to the company for 17 years. He certainly has good qualities about him. I just think that it went from a potential win-win situation to a lose-lose.
Yeah, it's the best way to put it, I think.
I gotta say though, with the story that we were given so far, it would take a very good person not to do what Green did.
It's true. Yeah.
After all that build-up, and you feel like you're like, wait, is no one else seeing what's going on? And then you get a chance to strike. Takes a good person not to strike.
True.
Group meeting.
Well, now that everyone has to rethink their lives and wonder which character they're in the story.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh well.
All right. Well, any last comments before we end?
Not from me.
I'm good too. So Dora, how do I like export this video?
So you'll see how you can download it straight to your computer, and so you'll have it like that. But the teacher wants us to submit it like a HTML link. So you just go onto YouTube and download it, and it takes like a half hour to load because it's an hour-long video.
Gotcha.
And then you just have the URL.
Okay.
Sometimes if you use the BYU Idaho version, you can also get it to where it's in the cloud, and after it's done like becoming a video, it'll send an email to you, and you can also provide the link that way. But sometimes I like the YouTube option because if anything, the link won't fail because you can prove it. You can test it on YouTube first. So.
Okay. Sweet. Well, I guess we'll figure it out.
Awesome. Thank you, Parker.
Thanks so much, you guys. And I think if I remember right, is it Ernesto that is in charge of the meeting next week?
Yes, that's right.
Okay. Perfect.
All right. See you guys next week.
See you later.
All right, guys, take care.
Adios.
Okay, we'll see you.
Bye.